Hi, everybody. Thanks for checking in. Seems to be 25 of you, which is quite impressive. So anyway, I'm going to start the slideshow. It's tweaked a little bit from previous years, but it's based on the same. Let's face it, it's a similar subject, but hopefully it's got something in there of interest to people. So here we go. Let's share the screen and start the slideshow. Here we go. Right. Okay, aerobatics, what's it all about? Well, that's what the purpose of tonight's meeting is, of course. So let's go. Oh, says he, hopefully. Come on, there we go. Why aerobatics? Well, as I say here, develop new skills. It's something that a lot of people are used to doing cross country, hill soaring and everything else. And they want something different. Well, here we go. Less likely to be surprised by unusual attitudes. Well, I think that's a really important aspect of aerobatics, because most pilots, the most severe movement, go back. The most severe attitude they experience is perhaps a practice cable break or a real cable break, or a spin check, for instance. Whereas aerobatics will give you'll get so used to these things that nothing will surprise you. So I think it's a good thing, and it means that you just would respond automatically to any unusual attitude the glider may get into. Having said that, it's less likely to get into an unusual attitude because you know what to do. So there you go. More confident pilot. I think that's another good aspect of it. It just gives you a bit more rounded skill level. Competition, well, that's certainly something I enjoyed, and it taught me an awful lot. I haven't done it for a few years now, but if you get to a certain stage, then I think you would benefit perhaps from aerobatics competition. And fun. Let's face it, we all want to have fun flying, and aerobatics is just a lovely way of flying. So let's go to the next bit. Here we go. Here's one I took earlier, and this is just sheer joy. To me, it was anyway, except the forward camera broke. It's just one of those balmy, lovely evenings over Portmoak, over the loch. Absolutely beautiful. So there you go. Who can do it? Well, pretty much everybody, really. Pre-bronze with an instructor only, for obvious reasons. We can't let you loose at too early a stage. But once you're bronze, when you've been suitably checked to fly aerobatic figures, then there's no reason why you shouldn't, subject to authorization. You've got to be medically fit, of course. Most of you flying here will be. Increased G, something you can build a tolerance to. And to start with, we don't do any particularly high G figures. High rates of descent. If you've got sticky ears, perhaps you might find a problem. If your station tubes get blocked very easily, I guess that could be a problem. But then I'm sure you would have discovered that for normal flying anyway. So that's unlikely to be a problem for you. Authorization by the chief flying instructor, deputy chief flying instructor, or an authorized aerobatic instructor. So don't just swan off and do aerobatics. Make sure you're cleared to do it first and you're authorized for that flight to do it, so that people know what you're going to do. So there you go. Right. Who can teach it? Well, the rules are going to change, but at the moment, the club full or half-cat instructors can teach up to sports, at least until the Part FCL kicks in next year. And who knows, that may be put off further. After that, it would only be an advanced aerobatic instructor that can teach aerobatics, which would be a terrible shame if that really does happen. And all of this is with the permission of the CFI, of course. So that's where we are at the moment. The figures, the first thing you do is learn the figures for what's called the club class or standard class. They're called different things. The BGA calls them standard, and the British Aerobatic Association calls them club. It's the same, amounts to the same thing. They consist of these figures, which you would learn initially. Up and down lines, we'll go into detail later on them. Loops, chandelles, humpties, steep turns, and the one-turn spin. The one-turn spin was sort of dropped from the syllabus for a while, mainly because the K21 couldn't do it. Having said that, when I did my initial training at Portmoak in the DG, we were able to do spinning, of course, but say in competition, it's not done. However, now we've got the PERCOS, and we still have the DG. There's no reason why we shouldn't teach spinning again. We'll give you an aerobatic rating progress card, and you'll see the left-hand side at the top are the figures for the standard class, and then to the right at the top, sports, and then intermediate below that. They're called figures because each maneuver that you do, that's just what we call them. We call them figures, and you'll notice that there's a little symbol alongside each one. And these are, it's a notation called a resti, which I'll show you in a moment, which allows you to write them down very easily and see what you're going to do without having lots of words. So let's go down a bit. The resti, the first part of that, you'll see these are very simple figures. The first one, the line, is in fact needed between each. When you join them all together in aerobatic sequence, you always have a horizontal line between them. In actual practice, being a glider, you can't fly a horizontal line without losing speed, so it's allowable to have a slight down angle on it. Any other lines apart from horizontals are either 45 degrees or vertical, up or down. There isn't anything else in between. There are obviously curves, but actual straight lines are going to be 45 up, down, or vertical. The dotted line you'll see on the bottom one there is actually it means that you've got negative angle of attack, so it's a push down figure. Again, as I'll go into detail later. And the numbers alongside represent a degree of difficulty. You see now, the first one, the one with the K3 and the 90 degrees against it, that's a 90-degree horizontal turn. And if you notice that the figures all start with a blob, a spot, and they end with a line. And when they end up 90 degrees away from the heading they started at, the line changes to horizontal instead of vertical. And that's how we know that it's actually changed angle by 90 degrees. You notice the one below it, it's 180 degrees. So the little line at the end is vertical. And the bottom one is 270. So that's just so you can see how there's, I'm just going to close something that's appeared on my computer. It's going to drive me nuts. Go away. I can't. Anyway, next. Then we go to loops, which I'm sure you'll all recognize. It's very obvious from the symbol what it is. The next one's a humpty, and that's called a canopy down humpty. Basically pulling up vertical, pulling over the top and down. You can do a humpty going the other way. You go to vertical, push over the top and down, which is being a push over. That's why it's dotted red. The last one is a chandelle, which we'll go into detail later. Where can we do it? Well, the Portmoak Aerobatic box down to 1500 foot. And in case you don't know where it is, there's the map, the chart. And you notice that this, I take it you can see my cursor there. This is the box we use, which is over the cut. There's the airfield. It's over the cut and the road crossing bridge. That's the center of the box. There is actually technically another box which is shown in the airfield manual at Grahamstone, but I've never used it. And I don't really consider it a safe place to be flying aerobatics, because it's in an area where there's likely to be lots of flying activity. There's a close-up of the box. And you notice how the road and the cut are not quite 90 degrees, but they're pretty damn close. And there's also a very convenient hedge there, which is useful to denote how far the box goes that way. And there's the other edge of this field, which shows the other line, and this one up here, the edge of the airfield. So it's actually an extremely good box. It's well marked out. So there you go. Looking at it, representing it diagrammatically, the box is 500 meters either side of the center line in each direction horizontally. The top of the box is at 4,000 feet, which is where we tow to. And the box floor actually depends on, in competitions, it depends on various things, but which I'll go into later. But for our purposes at Portmoak, we have to finish by 1,500 feet. The reason for the box is it basically contains us into a, it allows us to practice for competition where you have to try and stay in the box and you get penalized if you're outside of it. For our purposes, it's nice to have somewhere that you can actually practice for competitions. And even when we're practicing not for competitions, we try and stay either in the box or along the line of the cut so that everyone knows where we are. Aircraft requirements, well, working G meter, parachutes in date, which we need anyway, and it's certified and configured for the figures to be flown. And that means the aerobatic configuration and not utility. In other words, no wingtip extensions, no water ballast. It's in the manual, so it'll tell you what is the aerobatic configuration. Before we fly any sequence, we all know, and we do this before doing stall practice, spinning and so on, so you should all know the hassle checks. Height sufficient to recover in time to be safe. In our case, we need to recover by 1,500 feet because that's the bottom of the box. Airframe, we need to know the VNE and the VA for the aircraft we're flying. Straps secure, that's pretty obvious. Security, no loose articles, and I like to check the air brakes are secure, canopies secure. It's a good opportunity to check those things. And if you're flying an aircraft with undercarriage, make sure it's up and locked. Location, well, if we're in the box, we know it's clear of controlled airspace, built up areas, active airfields, congregations of people and a host of other things. Look out, we always do clearing turns in each direction before we fly in aerobatics. Okay, flying the line figures, lines, well, the level line is pretty straightforward, but as I say, we're allowed a down angle to maintain a constant speed, and obviously the faster you're going, the steeper that line will be, so there is no constant angle. Next one, these diagrams are quite handy. The down line, invariably, certainly to start with, we start each figure with, we start the sequence, if you like, or before each practice with a down line to gain enough speed to carry out the maneuver, the figure. And it looks dead straightforward, 45 degrees. But in actual fact, it's got to be done there's a particular way of doing it. And basically you push the nose over looking to the wingtip until you see a 45-degree down angle. You then fix your gaze onto a point on the ground. Don't let the nose come up. And you look at the AS and you glance backwards and forwards between the point on the ground and the ASI until it's 10 knots before the speed you want to finish at. And then you rotate to the level line, which, as I've said, will depend on the speed you're at. So it's not actually level, it's going to be down slightly. And that's then you positioned for the first figure. Okay. The up line is done in a different way, because this time you need to have enough speed, and you need to do it quickly enough that you could level out without stalling off the top. So that's a judgment call. Again, look to your wingtip, 45-degree up, push over in time so that you don't stall off the top. Steep turn. Well, I'm sure you've all done steep turns, but you probably haven't done an aerobatic steep turn. There's a particular way of doing it. Basically, you initially roll without turning. You then turn without rolling, and then you roll out. Or so you stop the turn and then you roll out. So when you first do it, normally you coordinate your rolls as your turn as you go in. In this case, you don't do that. You don't use any rudder going in, and the adverse yaw will stop the nose going in the direction of the turn. You then wrap in the bank, and you pull it round, maintaining speed all the way around. When you get to the end, you check forward on the stick to stop the turn, and then you roll out using lots of rudder so that you don't change direction. So it's quite a nice one to do. It's actually pretty unpleasant because of the jolt at the beginning and the end, but it's nice to get it right. The loop, well, that's a nice figure. Everyone likes to do loops. Ideally, they should look circular for obvious reasons, and more often than not, they don't. And you can't really be sure, except as an observer from the ground, whether they're circular or not. But there are certain tricks that you can do to make sure they are round. So that's one of the ones that I'll go into detail a bit later on, perhaps. Chandelle, another nice club figure. This one, up 45 degrees, you hold the line very briefly, you roll to 45 degrees, you pull it round the corner, it's coordinated at that point. The wings should be vertically up and down at the top. You keep pulling it round and it gradually comes back down onto the 45-degree down line, and you roll out onto the wings level, and you have an equal down line to the length of the up line, ideally, and you pull back out again. After each figure, we don't just pull back up to floating around about 50 or 60 knots. You maintain the speed ready for the next figure, and ideally you can adjust the speed coming out of the figure, because obviously you can hold that down line or pull out sooner to get the ideal speed for the next figure. Clearly, when we're training, you might not want to do too many on a go, so we may well pull back up to recover some of the height and give you a chance to recover before doing the next one. But in principle, you don't do that. You go straight to the next figure after a horizontal line. There's the Humpty. You can see that one's the canopy down, where you pull to vertical and you pull over the top, vertical line down, just held briefly, and then you pull out at the bottom. There is an alternative one, which I don't know if we've got. No, we haven't. The alternative is to do it is a push Humpty, where you pull up to vertical, push over the top, vertical down, and then pull out again. Those are quite nice figures. And just to amplify this point about the horizontal line that you don't pull straight out, when you're doing a sequence of figures in competition especially, you must have a horizontal line between them to distinguish it from the next figure. If you don't score any points. You lose everything on that one. So it's very important you have a line. The length of it is immaterial, and in fact, it'll be very much dependent on whether you're going upwind or downwind. Next one is the one-turn spin. This is different from the sort of aerobatic, the sort of spins that we do in the club for training purposes, in that the ideal spin, it drops into a spin without the nose rising perceptibly. You do a spin of the desired number of turns, let's say 1 turn, and you come out on the same heading that you went in. Oh, and on the way out, you do a vertical down line before you pull to horizontal on the same direction you went in. So there's the figure. You see the for it with the little line through it. This is one. Here's one I did earlier. So aerobatic spins are quite nice. Once you've done a few of those and you're focused on trying to come out on the heading, you just lose all your fear of spins, and they become a really nice thing to do. The only downside, of course, is that you lose quite a lot of height. So you perhaps don't do them as often as you might otherwise. There's a card which you'll be given before you start your training. So there's the basic card, and inside is the progress card which I showed you. Before we sign you off on that one, let's just go back. So if there's the figures which we teach you. Now, to get your standard badge, which gets signed off down here, we need to observe a solo sequence. So, and that gives you your ability to claim your form. And you're given basically something like that on a bit of paper, which you can stick into the cockpit ahead of you, and you go up and you fly that sequence, and it's observed from the ground, and you're expected to stay within the box within reason, and the figures have to look as they're supposed to. Obviously, at that stage, they don't have to be perfect, but the aim is as close to perfect as you can get. And if it's witnessed from the ground by myself or another aerobatic instructor to be good enough, then we sign you off and you get your badge. Flight envelope. Now, this is something that you should understand enough about for your particular aircraft. Now, it looks a bit complicated, doesn't it? So let's break it down. If you start off, there's the load factor on the left. You just draw a grid like so. You can make them yourself for any glider or any aircraft, probably. Certainly any glider, which is what I know about, just using the figures from the logbook. Load factor on the left is the G limits and the airspeed. Those sort of figures are probably sufficient for most gliders. To start with, you just pop in the stall speed, VS1, like so. And that's 1G, because that's what you stall. It's a 1G stall speed. So you can see that now, where that comes from. You then put in your VA, which you get for the manual, the max maneuvering. And in the case of a K21, it's 6.5 G. So you draw it in like so. And you can put a curve in like this. It's ideally it's a quadratic curve, but I drew these by hand, and I'm sure they're close enough for my purposes, certainly. So there's the curve. Now, what does that tell us? Well, flight impossible to the left. Now, if you think about it, it's a stall line effectively at various airspeeds. It will stall if you pull more than the G at a particular speed. We already know that at the stall speed at 1G, it'll stall. So at 35 knots, you cannot pull more than 1G because it just stalls. That's it. And likewise, these figures at the VA, 97 knots, that figure's been dictated by the factory, but in fact at 97 knots it will stall if you pull 6.5 G, and it works all the way down like so. Below the curve, apart from limits in other limits which we'll see in a moment, you can fly anywhere inside this curve, including below the stall speed, because you don't have to be pulling 1 G. For instance, if you're doing a bunt, then you could easily be below 1 G and the aircraft's perfectly flyable. So you might well be flying at 20 knots, but it doesn't mean it's not controllable. It just means that you have to you have to be pushing slightly to hold it down. Anyway, right. If we now put in the VNE again from the factory, from the logbook, sorry, not from the manual, you'll see in the K21 it's 5.3 G at 151. If we now draw a line across the two, that basically wings are overstressed if we go above that line. And again, this is something the factory's worked out from their calculations and the design of the aircraft. Now, if we put VDF, that's the flight test speed that was done once by the factory, and it's 0.9 times. Sorry, well, VNE is 0.9 times the flight test speed. So you see, there's not a massive margin between VNE and the maximum it's ever flown in test. So VNE is something to avoid going beyond. You'll have probably seen the videos that are available showing flutter, which occur past VNE. So you just don't even think about going there. And all the aerobatics I'll teach you will not be anywhere near VNE. We'll be flying in a K21, for instance, generally around 110 entry figure. They're most likely, for some figures, you might need 120, perhaps even 130, but that's it. So we always stay away from VNE. You can do the same thing for inverted flight, as you see here. So there's the other parts put in, inverted stalling speed, and again the figures you get from the manual. So now you see the air brake open G limit. You see that along there, 3.5 G, and that's pretty standard on most aircraft as far as I'm aware. So the bottom line is, if things are getting out of control and you need to contain the airspeed, don't pull the air brakes, because you weaken the wings down to 3.5. You can only pull 3.5 G. Whereas if you need to lose speed and you pull a lot of G, it will reduce speed much quicker. You see the per cos, similar one I did, and that one, it's got, you'll see that the speed, the VNE and the VA maximum G are the same. There's the DG505, which is actually remarkably similar to per cos in terms of the stress. The only real differences are the VA and the VNE, which are a couple of knots different. And the inverted stalling speed is better on the per cos. Here's some other gliders, aerobatic gliders, which you'll see. The size of the Swift, for instance, has got a massive envelope, which makes it a wonderful glider for flying aerobatics in, which is why it's the glider to do international competitions. The Fox is not far behind it, but the K21 stacks up quite well, as does the DG and the per cos. And your personal flight envelope, well, physiological, obviously you've got to be capable, and if you don't do aerobatics very often, they'll affect you more than if you do them more often. Oh, sorry, go back. And when I start at the beginning of a season, I haven't been flying aerobatics a lot, then I need to build up to it, and I find the G affects me far more at the beginning of the season than later on. Experience, well, obviously that's something you must take into account. If you've only done a few, then if necessary, if it's appropriate, get a check flight with someone, get more practice until you're comfortable and they're comfortable that you can do it. Knowledge, you need to understand what's everything that's involved in aerobatics in order to keep safe. Oh, going the wrong way, sorry. Now this is the next one you see is the sports. Now one of the problems with the standard figures, which I found anyway, is I used to practice them like crazy at Portmoak, and there was no one that could teach me any further. So I had to go away and I found just going up and down, changing direction with chandelles was becoming a bit tedious. Whereas when you do the sports, and I went down to Saltby to learn these, you introduce the quarter cloverleaf and a stall turn, both of which are nice ways of increasing your ability to turn. There's the cloverleaf. It's like a loop, except you do a roll on the way up in order to change direction by 90 degrees. It's a lovely figure, really neat. If you do two of them in the same direction, you change completely by 180. Or if you do two but in opposite directions, you carry on exiting in the same direction you started. The stall turn, that's another nice figure. Basically, you pull up to vertical and you yaw it around the wingtip at the top and come back down vertical before you pull out. Ideally, in theory, they're wingtip apart at the top. In practice, they're probably a little bit further than that. And there are various tricks you have to do to make it all happen. The sports sequence, here's one. You can see it's substantially more complex than the one which I showed you for the standard. All of these figures, even though some of them aren't obviously what you will have been taught on the ones I've shown you in the sequence on the figures, they are actually variants of them. For instance, this first one, it's a push to vertical down, which is just what you do when you come off the top of when you do a push Humpty, for instance. So, but instead of doing your 45-degree down line to start this one, you start at a low speed, push down to vertical. Now, this one is really just a loop, but with a 45-degree up line in the start of it. So 45-degree into the loop and out, stall turn, pull Humpty. Now this time you've got two clovers, and there's nothing in the diagram to indicate which way you should do them, and it's entirely up to you which way you do them. But if you notice in these diagrams, they've all got a wind direction in them, which means you always start from this side pointing into wind. This one turns you downwind, and after these two figures, you've got to be pointing back upwind again for this one. So in order to change direction, they need to be both in the same direction. So first one turns you through 90, the second one turns you another 90, so that you're pointing back the way you came. This one, again, it's just a 45-degree up line and a push to vertical. Stall turn, loop, and a chandelle. Oh, sorry. Here's one I did earlier. This was a competition some years ago. So if you can see the figures up here, it starts off with a push to vertical. The wing rocks beforehand to indicate to the judges I'd started. So there's my vertical down, gaining speed, brief horizontal, up to vertical, and then push over. Vertical down. Oh, sorry, chandelle, so it's this figure over here. Up, roll 45, pull round, wings vertical at the top, coming round back onto our reciprocal line, roll the wings level and come out. We've got two clovers now, and we want to end up going in the same direction, so they must be opposite to each other. There's the first one to the right. This one should be to the left, like so. So we're now still going in the same direction we started, still going downwind. Now we've got a stall turn coming. Into a pull Humpty. So there's our horizontal line. Up, vertical up, check, pull, check, down, horizontal, stall turn, up to vertical, yaw around the wingtip, into the vertical down, loop. I was just positioning there, that's why I'm watching to try and get the ideal position relative to the judges. Over the top. 180-degree turn coming up. And the last one is an upline. And I remember on this one, I didn't have enough speed and I was really nervous of flopping off the top. So I just held that line for a little bit to try and gain enough speed before I rocked the wings in case I fell out of it. You always do 3 wing rocks at the start and the end of each sequence. You see how wallowy it is because there was next to no airspeed. So that was a sports sequence. The next one is intermediate. Now this is where we start the rolling figures, and it's quite complex. It's a whole different game, this one. And you'll notice up here, roll to inverted, half roll from inverted to erect, sustained inverted flight, a slow roll, that's a complete roll, a Cuban 8, which basically it's rather like a loop, but except on the way out of the loop, you check 45 degrees down on the way out, inverted, roll to erect on the down line and go back out. Then you do the same again in the other direction. That's a Cuban 8. Then there's a half reverse Cuban. This one, start here and you basically go 45 degree up, but you roll to inverted on the way up and out. So the Cuban, you're rolling to inverted on the way, you're rolling out of inverted from the way down out of a loop. And the half reverse, you do it the other way around. A split S, basically, you roll to inverted and pull through. An inverted turn, you start off inverted and you do a 60-degree turn all the way around and you come out in whatever heading direction is required. So those are the intermediate ones. You can see this is an intermediate default free. These are set by the British Aerobatic Association for the competitions. This one's called a goldfish. Basically, it's a half a Cuban, except instead of starting level, you do 45-degree down, roll, check on the 45 coming out, roll to erect, and pull out. You can see it's a bit like a goldfish. Stall turn, Humpty. Here's our reverse half Cuban. They all get drawn in funny ways in order to make them fit into the diagram. So there's a number of ways of doing it, but they all, in essence, have the same features. So anyway, this one, you'll see, you go up 45, roll to inverted, pull through, and there you go. Now this one, when you do a roll, you can break it into pieces. In other words, sorry, rephrase that. You can make it into a hesitation roll. In this particular case, it's 2 times 4. The 4 being the number of points in the roll. So if you did a full 4-point roll, you'd stop the roll every 90 degrees. So the wings vertical, inverted, wings vertical again, and back to erect. In this case, you're doing 2 out of 4. So you end up inverted. 180-degree turn, a full roll and a half. That's the symbol for a full roll. That's the symbol for a half roll and out. Stall turn, loop, and an Immelman, which is a roll off the top. So you get to the top and roll to erect at the top. You notice all these figures have got numbers by them. These are the arrestee numbers, and they're used for judging. And these little points, they're all made up of components. Each figure has got components comprising them, like the down line, the loop, the roll, the pull out, and all the rest of it. And there's various other things which go to make up the figure. So all these add up, and you end up with these scores, which are used in competition for judging. Obviously, the simpler the figure, the less you get for it. Training at Portmoak. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I've got something. Can you give me a second? I've got, oh, there it is. Get rid of that. I have something stuck on my screen, which is becoming a nuisance. Yeah, my plan this year is to be able to have evenings starting when the clocks go back. That's what we normally do. And they would start at 5, so I'd aim to be there at 5. And we'd fly as late as we can in the day. Obviously, to start in the year, we can probably only do a very small number of flights. But towards the end of the middle of the year, when we have the longest nights, we can fly right up till quite late and get quite a few in. Hopefully this year, I'm also intending to do courses during the week. My master plan is to sell the business this year, which is in the process. And although I won't be fully extracted from it, I'm expecting to have enough time out, which I've told them I need, so that I can run the occasional course during the week. So the aim would be to do a full week's course. Probably anyone who could do it would benefit far more doing it consistently over a week than they would just one night every week. So that's the master plan. The cost, and this is the killer, an aerotow to 4,000 feet is £42.40. The flight's likely to take about 20 minutes. So there we go, £11. So the total cost £53. Now, Bruce Duncan had suggested to me that it may be possible to get a grant for some of the younger members, and we'll certainly look into that if there's enough interest, which might help things. I know it's expensive, but it's a lot of fun, and yeah, it's a great thing to do. So here's the gliders that we use, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the good old K21s, which are an extremely good aerobatic training glider, certainly to start with. It has all the right characteristics. It's very forgiving, and it's not too slippery, so it doesn't gain speed overly fast. The DG505, that's also a nice glider to teach aerobatics in. That does build up speed reasonably fast. And the new Percos. Now, the Percos is excellent in that it's a great glider to fly. It can do figures that the others can't do, which won't be something which will affect you at this stage anyway. For instance, it can do tail slides, so we can go vertical, slide backwards, and then fall over either forward or backward. That's something that you can certainly break the glider, even though it's cleared for it. You have to do it absolutely correctly. The other thing it can do is flick rolls, which allow like a horizontal spin. It does those rather nicely. The downside of the Percos for training is that it builds speed very fast in a downline. So these are the things to consider. Safety, lookout, that's paramount. And you must, whether you're upside down, in whatever you're doing, you've got to keep that lookout going. Understand and stay within the glider limits. Preparation of the aircraft before and in flight. These are all the things that we need to do. Empty all the loose articles into the parachute bag to make sure it's completely clear. vacuum the cockpit, pick the wing triangle if available, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Pre-flight, thorough inspection, internal and external. Even if it's been flown during the day, I still want to see a pre-flight done before we start aeros for the evening. Ballast in limits, all water dumped. Invariably, the manuals say that water has to be dumped for aerobatics. Do you need a seat back? Can you get stick fully forward when vertical? I mean, I still use the seat back when I'm flying aeros in a K21 anyway, because if you're not careful, you're going vertical, you can't reach the stick. So that's something that we're aware of. Harness tight, particularly the lap strap. Check all your pockets and make sure they're all zipped up. You don't have any loose articles. Camera, if used, must be securely fixed. Hassle, which we've gone through, really important. Authorized figures only. Well, hope that goes for red, but it's don't go out there and try anything that you've not been taught to do and you've not been cleared to do. K21 and the GG, the prohibited aerobatics, abrupt figures, flicks, tail slides, and outside loops. These are things that are not allowed in those gliders. I don't suppose they're going to worry you too much at the early stages. Never spontaneous. Don't just think, oh, God, what a lovely day, I'm going to go and do a few loops. Just don't do it. Make sure you do it when you do these things when you've been cleared to do it and you've gone up specifically to do it. Self-discipline, health. If you're not feeling good, you're not feeling up to it, just don't do it. Don't show off. I hope that's obvious, but you know, people do, and I'm sure you'll have heard lots of stories about people flying upside down on the ridge and things like that in the distant past. Hopefully, don't do it. And back to lookout. That's so critical. Next step, competition. You'll see all sorts of gliders in competition. And my first sports one was in a pooch. Is that true? No, it's not. It's not true. No, my first standard badge, which I did. Actually, no, it was a sports badge. The first one I did down at Saltby was in the pooch because the K21 was broken, and that was quite scary because it's got very low VNE. K21, as we talked about, and these other gliders, the Pilatus, that's one you'll see in competitions. It's a metal and it makes horrible boinging noises when you pull G. DG1000, this is a very good aerobatic glider. In fact, I did some of my rolling training in a DG1000 at Lasham. Lunac, very old. You may see it in competition. It was originally designed for training Russian fighter pilots. At its time had an extraordinary high speed, but it's been very much limited now because that was my Poor Acro, which I've sold. The Fox and the Swift are the two ideal gliders for aerobatic competition. This was Saltby during a competition. Unfortunately, Saltby has lost the will to do aerobatics. The CFI has changed and people aren't interested anymore, unfortunately. So that's I've been looking to COVID, probably hasn't helped either, but the competitions have thinned down. And the competitions, oh, sorry, let's go back one. The competitions now are at places like Lasham and Dunstable, and there may be others, of course, but it could all come back. There's the box back again. I mean, you'll see that there's your beginners. In a competition, the base is 1,500 foot with a disqualified if you get below 1,000. At sports, that drops to 1,000, disqualified at 700. An advanced and unlimited 700, disqualified at 350. In the case of competition, the judges are all aligned along one side of the box. There's two axes, the x-axis, which is centered roughly aligned with the wind, basically, as best they can, subject to the ground features, which are fixed, of course. But they'll try and decide which direction is the x-axis, depending on the wind, and the judges will sit appropriately to observe. This is something that, again, you'll need to know for competition. there's a thing called zero lift axis, ZLA, and center of gravity track. When a glider's flying on a line, vertical or 45 degrees, those are the two lines I said we could do, like there. They're always zero lift angle. And you see the 45 one there as well. And basically, you look at that is a line that the judges will look at on the glider and say that's the center line of the glider effectively as they observe it. And this is one of the reasons we put a wing triangle on, so that we try and fly the glider. We try and find an ideal line, whether upright or inverted, that it looks right from the ground as far as a judge goes. I didn't describe that very well, but you'll have to get the gist of it in time. Center of gravity track is, if you close your eyes, just squint them up and watch the aircraft. It's basically the blob that it forms as it's going around. So obviously you can't have a particular angle during a curved segment. Likewise, you can't on a straight flat segment, because at the bottom, see this, the power plane here is fast at the bottom, slow at the top. The angle of attack will be completely different. There's your wing triangle. Most of them look rather like this one that I had on my acro. You can see this line here is just that you try and line it up with what you perceive to be the center of the zero lift axis of the glider, which is pretty much, you try and line it up the line through the wing where it's not going to gain any lift. It's easy on a glider that's got symmetrical wing because it's right through the chord line. If you're flying 45 degree up, this one would be horizontal with the horizon. If you're flying 45 degree down, that one would. Flying vertical, this one would be vertical. So it's pretty essential if you're flying competition. And we'll try and get one for the PERCOS. We've certainly got one for the K21 already, but I'll try and get one made for the PERCOS. You'll see this, the Fox has an enormous triangle on it. Now this is the walk. At competitions, you'll see people doing the walk, okay? And it might look rather silly, but it basically, you think your way through the sequence and you fly it in your head. You do it relating to the wind, so you've got the wind in your face or on your back, and it allows you to figure out which way you're going to fly things, whether you do a left something or a right something. So this is Jyrski. I think he was from Finland. He did give me permission to video him. Thank you, Jyrski. And there's an advanced sequence, and you can see that it's starting to get serious. Roll to inverted. You come out nicely erect at the top. Roll back to inverted. 2-point roll to erect. Loop 45 degree down. Now this one's a tail slide. So this one's up. So you pull up to vertical. You pull the tail out from under you. So you pull back on the stick as you're sliding backwards. So you basically get to the top, wait till the airflow is stopped, which is why I used to have those tussles on my wingtip triangles, so you can see when the airflow stopped, so that you know when to pull the elevator or to push, depending on which way you're going. So you come out, roll, sorry, rephrase that, you slide backwards. As it goes, it'll basically flop down when it goes. You can only slide backwards so far. The elevator takes over. It'll flop, in this case, forward, and it'll flop down past the vertical, which is the essential feature of a tail slide. If the judge doesn't see it, then it ain't a tail slide. Quarter roll on the exit, up into a humpty, quarter roll on the down line, a loop with a 2-point roll at the top, which is actually a Chinese loop. Stall turn. Oh, sorry, this is an advanced figure. Yeah, advanced, yeah. Sorry, I was thinking it was the next one. 4-point roll up into a half a cube but this time with the 2-point roll coming out back to erect. A P loop, vertical, finish the loop, and a 2-point roll off the top, 2-point Immelman. And here's what I did earlier. These are some figures just to give you an idea. Stall turn. And there's your quarter roll on the down line. Next one, canopy down tail slide. So this one, you push the tail out from under you. You notice it flops down way past the vertical. Then you hold the vertical briefly. Half a Cuban 8. This one, remember I said it was like a, this one I didn't start from horizontal, but it was just a practice. You check at 45° down, check, roll to erect, and out. Next one, a Chinese loop. This is where you have a roll at the top of the loop. Ideally, the roll will be centered around the top. So it shouldn't be flat at the top. So that's not a particularly good Chinese loop. This is a flick to inverted, the half loop downwards. I just love those. And then we get the unlimited, which is the top end. And the guys, they are, it says unlimited, they're actually very limited number of people who fly unlimited. It's really tough. I'll just do my best to talk your way through this one. Downline, half a flick to inverted, roll back to erect, out, canopy down tail slide, quarter roll on the exit, quarter roll on the up line into a stall turn, down. This is a Chinese loop with a flick roll at the top, into a humpty, flick roll on the way down. Oh, it's a half a flick roll on the way down, I think. Coming out erect, 2-point roll, half a flick roll on the way up, 45° up line, vertical down, pull up into a P loop with a Chinese loop at the top, reverse half Cuban. And this one at the end is a rolling turn. Basically, he's got to do a full roll while he's turning through 90°. Not for the faint-hearted. If you want to sort of look into it, then I strongly recommend you go into British Aerobatic Association. If you just search for British Aerobatic Association, and you come up with aerobatics.org.co.uk. Competitions there will tell you all about competitions. Briefing room is a whole bunch of really useful stuff about aerobatics. It's mainly power, but there's quite a lot of glider stuff as well. And if you log into competitions, for instance, you'll see this here. Oh, sorry, the sequences rather. You'll end up. You can choose the year, and you can choose what are called knowns. There are various types of sequence. Basically, when you go and do a competition, at certain levels, they give you what's called knowns. There's usually a known 1 and a known 2, which basically they give you to fly. And you don't find out what they're going to be until the morning of the competition or just before the competition. Later on, they don't give you knowns. You actually have to produce your own sequences, although they do still give you a known as a default if you can't produce your own sequence. So the knowns are really useful. If you notice here, this is power, but down here at club, oh, go away. Down here at glider programs, known 2 club class, that's your basic one that we talked, for your standard badge. There are 2 sequences. They're not wildly different. And then beyond it, there's sports. But you can check different years. if you can get hold of that book, it's a really good book to have. I strongly recommend it. It's quite difficult to get in print now. I've got a copy. You might find it online as a sort of a rip-off copy, but it's very, very good. And there you go. Questions. Let me stop sharing. So there we go. I baffled you all. Clearly I have.
That was wonderful, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, who's that? Sorry, I can't see.
Oh, hi, it's Bernie. I'm wondering.
Oh, hi, Bernie. Sorry, I can't see you.
Sorry, I think my video's off. Goodness, what do I look like at this time?
Oh, okay, no worries. Oh, well, it's very good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Anything else? We have George Risk here, from who I've flown with a few times at down at Saltby, and he's now, I think he said he's at Bern, if I got that right. And he's another advanced aerobatic instructor, far more experienced than I am. And he's on occasion come up to help with the aerobatics at Portmoak, and it may well be that he's prepared to do so again. So that's something that I'll talk to him about.
Peter, it's Richard.
Hello, Richard.
Did I see that you've got a huge, great yaw string on the, or had a huge, great yaw string on the glider?
On my one?
Yeah, there was like 2 red lines or something on the canopy.
Oh, no, what you're seeing, let me go back to that share screen. Can you see it now?
Not yet, no.
Oh, sorry, I haven't clicked the share button, that's why. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah, if you look, there's my yaw string, that blue one.
Yep.
And this is a sighting device I have for 60-degree angles. So when I'm doing inverted 60-degree turns, it helps me to get that 60-degree lined up with the horizon.
Ah, right. And then the other lines are just reflections.
They're just reflections.
Yeah. Okay, I've got it. Yep. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, back again. So I think I've stunned you all into silence.
It's Stuart Reid here. I just wonder, is there any sort of special techniques you have to develop for dealing with a high G in some of these maneuvers? Some of them look pretty extreme from a G perspective.
You build up a tolerance naturally. I mean, to start with, when I started with Neil Macaulay, and to start with, I used to get quite ill, actually. I used to feel quite ill. I never actually was ill. And what I found was that I took antacids, just popped an antacid tablet in my mouth, and it did the trick. And I think it was just the acid was getting thrown up when I was inverted. But the G tolerance is, we start off fairly gentle. You know, you're only pulling 3, possibly 4 G in most of the figures at standard, which most people seem to be able to tolerate quite well. But you definitely build the tolerance to it. And I think I mentioned earlier, at the start of the season, I don't have the tolerance I have at the end, that I have at the end of the season. I've been flying relatively regularly aerobatics, so I still have a tolerance now. But if I was to stop flying for a reasonable period, then I'm sure that I would lose that tolerance and I'd have to start all over again. So I'm sure you would find the same.
I'd heard stuff about sort of squeezing your leg muscles and that sort of thing, but is that all just urban myths?
No, not at all. I don't find the need to do it. And bear in mind that we're pulling G for only a few seconds. The people who need to do this, the power guys, because they can pull G for they can pull a lot of G for a long time, and that's where they have these problems. I have on some of my figures, I must admit I've come close to my limit, and I've been aware of it, and I've backed off. And probably if I'd have done some of these techniques, it may have helped. but I try and not pull more G than I need to. And it is fairly brief. I mean, I do pull 7G now and again on some figures where I just need to, because I need to get to the top of a figure really quickly in order to have enough energy at the top. But it's probably only over 2 or 3 seconds. If I was to try and sustain that, it would be not pleasant at all. And I try and avoid negative G, so I generally don't do more than 3 or 4 negative, because it's unpleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And one of the things that, can you hear me, Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I always find that I approach with trepidation is vertical maneuvers going down, because the sort of thing that always worries me, particularly in really clean gliders, is how quickly they accelerate. And I presume the K21 is really quite good from that point of view.
It is. Yeah, the K21 has a nice thick wing, and yes, you're right. Going vertical, you still can only hold it briefly, but it'll build up speed. But whereas the per cos is very noticeable how fast it builds up speed, which is why it's actually probably, I'm a bit reluctant to suggest we use the per cos for some of the figures which we trained. The K21 is probably actually a better glider for training, certainly in the early days. You really don't want it to get away from you, and the per cos builds up speed so fast. Although it's claimed to be an unlimited glider, I think I've spoke to George about this, and he agrees with me that going vertical in it and trying to do a quarter roll on a downline is not a good idea. You'd be awfully close to V&E, if not through it. So there are some figures that you just wouldn't sensibly do.
So how do you judge that then? How do if you're in the vertical? I mean, okay, so the K21's got a VNE of what, 151 knots.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the sort of thing that worries me is if you get to the VNE and you're in the vertical, what do you do?
Well, the answer is you don't get to the vertical.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Near VNE.
I
always try and stay well away from VNE.
So at which point do you turn around? At which point do you turn around and say, do you have a specific speed that you turn around and say, I've got to be coming out of it by? Do you see what I'm saying? How do you judge?
I do. I think that the answer is that you build up to these things, and I mean, I know in doing a certain figure what sort of speed to expect to come out at. And if when I'm practicing it's starting to get close to the edge, then I'll obviously worry about that. But I wouldn't want to get closer than to say. So it depends what angle you're at. Obviously, if you're still vertical and you're approaching V&E, you've got a big problem.
Yeah.
And the wings will probably come off. So you just don't do it. That's why I say this doing a quarter roll on a vertical downline is something you would just not do in a per cos, I don't think. In my acro, I could do it. Again, I didn't hold the line for very long because I was trying to keep the speed down. And although the limit was 156, I would generally not go beyond, I wouldn't need to take it beyond about 130, 135. So it's a big margin. So it's not like I'm glued to the ASI worrying about it getting to V&E, because I'm nowhere near it. And the same would apply in the per cos. I just wouldn't get into that situation where I'm having to look closely at see if it's getting close to V&E. It just wouldn't get there. Sorry, it's a bit vague, but that's.
No, I mean, yeah, it's not vague. It's, as you say, it's a matter of judgment. You slowly go into it and explore it, to build up, your experience, and then act accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions at all? Well, I think that was fantastic. I've done. There's a few chats here. I mean, we're getting really nice comments. You've had if you look on the chat, from Martin Flynn, Thanks so much. Love the powered aeros in the past. Keen to learn gliders once I am up and running. Amazing videos with the wingtip. And then Mark Adams, brilliant. Scott Candy, thanks, Peter. You know, I think that for a lot of glider pilots, it's yeah, a bit gobsmacking, really.
It's you build up to these things. You know, you start off gentle, and you work up, and obviously if you can get to a point like I did where you just want to do more and more. Is that George want to say so? Hi, George.
Hi, I would like to thank you. It was excellent. It's very good. Just one comment. The basic badge does not need the hump canopy up. It's just the canopy down one. And no, obviously no spin for the basic badge. And the turn, it has to be a 70-degree turn on the basic badge. So it's quite simple. The basic badge is quite doable for any club glider pilotry. It does not need much. It needs a lot of practice, definitely, a lot of money. And yes, it's very good. Thank you very much. And I'll be coming to Portmore to fly, definitely.
That would be lovely, George. That would be lovely. Yeah, I mean, you say about the spin not being in the, yes, you're quite right. It's not necessary for the judging for the sequence. However, it's a nice thing to teach, and if you don't have to do it, but I think it's a nice thing to learn, and I think you'd all enjoy it. Sorry, who was that? Andy Davey.
Yeah, hi Pete. I'm not actually a member at Portmoak, but I get copied into all Sant's emails.
Right.
Would your courses that you're envisaging running over the week, would they be open to non-Portmoak club members, do you think?
In theory, I don't see why not. I haven't set anything up yet, and I need to be able to find time when I can do it. But I don't see a problem. Obviously, we don't want to find ourselves excluding club members for people outside.
No, absolutely no. But yeah, so I guess if I just keep my eyes open on the website and Sant's emails, I should hear about them if you're running any then.
Yeah, I think that would be the best approach. And depending on how many people want to come, it may be that we'll have to restrict numbers, because there's no point everyone turning up and not being able to fly. That would be disappointing for everybody.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I must say, if I could add to that, Peter, that you know, having done a little bit of aeros myself, the fact you talk about the various standards, but I don't personally think there's anything wrong with, for example, teaching. Well, you can comment on that, on teaching the flicking manoeuvres, because I mean, like you've said, the flick off the top of a loop and so on, right? I mean, personally, when I used to fly powered aircraft, I used to love flick rolls. I think flicks are just fantastic maneuvers. I just love them. Will you actually teach those in the PERCOS? I know it's
not to start with, certainly. That's something that you need to be intermediate to do the rolling figures, and it's pretty well specified that.
Oh, right.
You have to do it at the right sequence. You have to know when it goes wrong. It's fine and dandy when it's going right, but when it goes wrong, you find yourself inverted. Then you need to be able to get out of it safely. So if you haven't been taught rolling figures, then it's just dangerous, and I wouldn't do it.
I can just see Sant doing a flick roll in an Airbus A310. Or whatever it was he was flying.
I don't think the passengers would appreciate that. They wouldn't notice, really. They'd be, it's only if their gin and tonic spilt, which if you did it properly, I don't think.
I think the fin would come off.
Well, yeah, I think that was a co-pilot that caused that. But there we go. Right. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Oh, Scott. What's that mean? A question mark there.
Okay. I can't see anyone else with their hands up here.
Okay. Well, let's just have a quick look at the chat. Anything else there? No, there's nothing there.
Hi, it's Bernie again. I just
Hi,
like,
Bernie.
hi, I'd like to say the bit of aerobatics I did with you a few years ago, I found that it really improved my aircraft handling. And it was something, although the sessions look expensive, I found that it was a very good investment in my flying because I improved so much over the weeks.
That's good to know. And I love it. I just think everyone should do some, even if it's only a small amount, just to sort of get them out of this idea that they always fly around sort of in a sedate manner. And it means they're not going to get surprised by something, you know.
Yes.
It's just a nice thing to do.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing lots more whenever you're running courses and doing evening flying. So, yeah,
Good.
looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, all right, well, we'll call it quits at that. Peter, thanks very much.
Thanks for helping set it up, Sant. You put a lot of time in trying to get this working for me.
Yeah, no, not at all.